The dust cloud rose 300 meters ahead, kicked up by the IED that had just vaporized the lead Humvee. Corporal Kira Stratton hit the dirt before her brain fully processed the explosion, muscle memory taking over where thought failed. 27 years old, 5'7", 135 pounds soaking wet, she pressed herself against the crumbling wall of the compound and felt her heart hammering against the packed earth of Afghanistan. The sound came after. It always came after. A rolling thunder that shook the ground beneath her chest and sent fragments of mud brick raining down on her helmet. She could taste the dust, could feel it coating the inside of her throat like wet cement. Somewhere to her left, a Marine was screaming. Not words, just sound. The kind of sound a human being makes when their world has been rearranged without their permission. The Marines called her Bullet, short for Bullet Bunny, the term they used for ammunition carriers. It was not cruel. It was just accurate. For 6 months she had hauled magazines and belts through Helmand province while men with rifles did the actual fighting. She had loaded weapons, she had cleaned barrels, she had counted rounds until her fingers were black with carbon and her back ached from carrying weight that was never hers to fire. She had been invisible in the way that support personnel always are. Necessary but unremarkable, present but unseen. That was the deal she had made with herself 5 years ago. Stay invisible, stay quiet, stay away from the thing you swore you would never touch again. The second explosion came from the east. RPIPG. Her mind registered it automatically the way a mechanic hears an engine knock and knows exactly which cylinder is misfiring. 200 meters out, maybe less. The Taliban were bracketing their position. Classic ambush tactics. Pin the enemy with the initial blast, then close the trap from the flanks. Kira's fingers found the radio on her vest. But before she could key the mic, Master Sergeant Hank Coltrane was already calling it in. Viper 6, this is Viper 1-2. Troops in contact grid November Delta 478362. Taking fire from multiple positions, requesting immediate QRF, over. Hank's voice was steady, professional. The voice of a man who had done this 100 times before and expected to do it 100 times more. 54 years old. Built like a fire hydrant with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite by someone who had run out of patience halfway through the job. He was the team's primary sniper. Had been since before some of these Marines were born. And right now he was scrambling up the ladder to the roof, the Barrett M82 slung across his back like a third limb. Kira watched him climb. She knew that rifle better than she knew her own reflection. The Barrett weighed 28 pounds empty. It fired 50 caliber rounds that could punch through engine blocks at 1.5 miles. She had carried that rifle across 3 provinces, had loaded it hundreds of times, had cleaned every component until the metal gleamed like surgical steel. She knew the weapon's manual by heart, could field strip it blindfolded, could recite its effective range and muzzle velocity from memory the way other people recite their phone numbers. She had never been allowed to fire it in combat. That was not her job. Her job was to carry the bullets. Someone else pulled the trigger. The compound they were defending was a standard Afghan structure. Mud brick walls 2 feet thick, flat roof, small windows that were more like firing slits than actual openings. Intel had said this area was clear. Taliban had moved through weeks ago. The patrol would be routine. Intel had been catastrophically wrong. She could hear Hank on the roof now, his boots scraping against the clay tiles as he moved into position. The distinctive sound of the Barrett's bolt being worked, a metallic chunk that echoed down to where she crouched like the sound of a vault door closing. He would be setting up the bipod, checking his scope, ranging targets, doing what he did best. The bullet that struck Hank came 3 seconds later. She heard the shot a fraction of a second after the impact. A flat crack that rolled across the valley like distant thunder. Hank made a sound. Something between a grunt and a gasp. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just the quiet, surprised noise a man makes when his body has been punctured by something traveling faster than sound. Then she heard the heavy thump of a body hitting the roof. The metallic clatter of the Barrett falling beside him. Sniper. Someone shouted from across the compound. Corporal Harlan, probably. His voice was high with adrenaline and fear. Sniper on the ridge. Everybody stay down. Kira's training said to stay down. Stay in cover. Let the professionals handle it. Her training said she was support personnel, that her job was to survive and resupply, not to fight. Her training said a lot of things that made perfect sense in a classroom and meant absolutely nothing when a man was bleeding on the roof above her head and the Taliban was closing from 3 sides. She was already moving before she consciously decided to move. The ladder was exposed, 12 feet of open air where a sniper could track her movement and put a round through her skull before she made it halfway up. Kira climbed anyway. Her hands found the rungs, her boots found purchase, and she moved with a speed that surprised even herself. Fear could do that. Fear could make you faster than you ever thought possible when the alternative to speed was death. She pulled herself onto the roof and saw Hank. He was on his back, one hand pressed to his right shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers in dark ribbons that soaked into the clay beneath him. The shoulder wound was high, missed the lung by maybe 2 inches. She could see that from the way he was breathing, labored but rhythmic, painful but sustainable. He would live if they got him to a surgeon. His eyes were open, glazed with shock and pain, but tracking, still aware, still present. "Get down!" He managed it through clenched teeth, his voice wet and thick. "Too dangerous up here." The Barrett lay 3 feet away, right where it had fallen when Hank dropped it. The scope was still attached, the bipod legs extended. 5 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber, ready to fire. 28 pounds of American engineering lying on an Afghan rooftop waiting for someone to pick it up and do the only thing it was designed to do. Kira looked at the rifle. Then she looked at Hank. Then she looked out across the valley to where the enemy was regrouping for another assault. 400 meters away. Maybe more. Taliban fighters were moving through the rocks and scrub dark shapes against the pale earth. She could see their muzzle flashes winking in the haze, could see the dust their boots kicked up as they maneuvered into better positions. They were getting organized. A commander was directing traffic, pointing, shouting, pushing his men forward with the confidence of someone who believed the ambush was working. Someone needed to stop them. Someone needed to take that rifle and put rounds down range before the Taliban overran their position and killed every Marine in the compound. Someone needed to do what Hank Coltrane could no longer do. The rifle. Kira said it quietly. Her voice sounded strange in her own ears, distant and calm, like it belonged to someone standing behind her. "I can use it." Hank tried to laugh. The sound came out as a wet cough that brought fresh blood to the corner of his mouth. "You are support," he said. "Get to cover." But Kira was already pulling the Barrett toward her. 28 pounds of steel and polymer engineered for a single purpose. The weight felt familiar. The weight felt right. Her fingers found the bolt, checked the chamber automatically, loaded, ready. Everything her body remembered, even though her mind had spent 5 years trying to forget. She settled into position behind the rifle, the stock against her shoulder, her cheek against the rest. The scope came up to her eye and the world narrowed to what she could see through the glass. Magnified, clarified, reduced to crosshairs and distance and wind. Below her in the compound, Lieutenant Prescott was shouting, "Stratton, what are you doing? Get off that roof!" She did not answer, could not answer, because now she was breathing, really breathing. The way her father had taught her when she was 11 years old, standing on a range in Montana with mountains at her back and a rifle that was too big for her pressed against her shoulder, that was too small to absorb the recoil. In through the nose, out through the mouth, slow, controlled. Finding the rhythm that would steady her heart, that would make her body still, that would let her see what needed to be seen and do what needed to be done. 400 meters. The Taliban commander was directing his men forward. She could see him through the scope, could see the way he gestured with his rifle, the way the other fighters looked to him for guidance. He was wearing a pakol hat and a dark vest over his shalwar kameez. He was the one making the decisions. He was the one keeping the ambush alive. He was the one who needed to die first. Wind from the east, maybe 8 knots. She could see it in the way the dust devils moved across the valley floor. Temperature 98 degrees, humidity low. Her father's voice in her head, patient and precise the way it always was when they were on the range together. Account for everything, Kira. Wind, temperature, distance, elevation. Every variable matters. Every calculation counts. Her finger touched the trigger. The championship finals had been in Wyoming. She was 16 years old, the youngest competitor by 4 years. 900-meter shot. Wind gusting to 15. Target the size of a dinner plate. Her father had stood behind her, one hand on her shoulder, calm and steady as bedrock. Trust your training, he had said. Trust yourself. She had made the shot. Center mass. Perfect. That was 11 years ago. That was before everything fell apart. Kira's finger tightened. 400 meters. The Taliban commander was still shouting orders she could not hear, but could see in the way his mouth moved, the way his arms swept forward, urging his fighters to advance. Straightforward shot! She had made this shot 1,000 times, never at a human being. The Barrett roared. The recoil hammered her shoulder exactly the way she remembered. 50 caliber rounds produced over 10,000 foot-pounds of energy at the muzzle. The rifle kicked like an angry mule, and Kira absorbed it. Let her body move with the force instead of fighting it the way her father had taught her to ride the recoil like a wave. 400 meters away, the Taliban commander dropped. Holy, someone said from below. Harlan, she thought, or maybe Prescott. She could not tell because she was already working the bolt, ejecting the spent casing, chambering a new round. The brass clinked against the roof tiles and rolled into the gutter. Second target, machine gunner, 350 meters, moving toward a better firing position behind a low wall. He was carrying a PKM, the Russian-made belt-fed weapon that could shred their compound if he got it set up and dialed in. Kira led him slightly, accounting for his movement, for the wind, for the way the bullet would drop over distance. She fired. The machine gunner went down. Third target, RPG team, 420 meters, 2 men, 1 carrying the launcher, 1 carrying the rockets. They were setting up behind a boulder, getting ready to put another round into the compound. Kira put the crosshairs on the man with the launcher. Squeezed. He fell sideways and did not move. The man with the rockets looked around confused, trying to understand where the shots were coming from, trying to locate the thunder that was killing his friends. Kira chambered another round and shot him too. 4 targets down in 90 seconds. The Taliban fighters were scattering now, breaking formation, diving for cover behind anything solid enough to stop a 50 caliber round, which was almost nothing at this range. Their assault had stalled. The men who had been advancing were now retreating, and the ones who had been waiting to move forward were reconsidering every choice that had led them to this valley on this day. Kira tracked another target. A fighter who was trying to rally the others, who was waving his rifle and shouting with the desperate energy of a man watching his plan collapse in real time. She shot him, 5 down. Then she saw him, 600 meters out, partially concealed behind an outcropping of rock, a glint of metal. Scope glass catching the sun. The enemy sniper. The one who had shot Hank. The one who had been controlling the battlefield until Kira picked up the rifle and changed the equation. She tracked him through her own scope, caught a glimpse of a face, and her finger froze on the trigger. The face was not Afghan, not Taliban. The features were European, sharp cheekbones, pale eyes that caught the light even at 600 meters, older, weathered. The kind of face that belonged to a man who had spent decades in places where the sun burned and the wind cut and the killing never stopped. He was looking back at her through his own scope. For 3 seconds they stared at each other across 600 meters of empty air. 2 snipers. 2 professionals. Recognition passed between them. The kind of recognition that only comes when you meet someone who does what you do, who understands what you understand, who lives in the same narrow world of crosshairs and calculations and the terrible intimacy of watching someone die through magnified glass. He had the shot. She could see it in his position. 600 meters. Clean line of sight. He could have killed her the same way he had shot Hank. Quick. Professional. 1 round and it would be over. He did not fire. He pulled back behind the rocks and disappeared like smoke on a windy day. Gone. Just gone, as if he had never been there at all. Kira lowered the Barrett. Her shoulder ached from the recoil. Her hands were shaking slightly now that the adrenaline was beginning to fade. But she was alive. Hank was alive. Everyone was alive because she had picked up that rifle and done what needed to be done. Lieutenant Prescott was climbing the ladder. His face was a mixture of shock and anger and something that might have been reluctant admiration. He reached the roof, saw Hank bleeding, saw Kira behind the Barrett with 5 confirmed kills at ranges that most trained snipers would struggle to match with a sandbag rest and all the time in the world. "Where the hell did you learn to shoot like that?" he demanded. Kira did not take her eye from the scope. She was still scanning, still looking for threats, still waiting for the European face to reappear. "I can shoot," she said quietly. Her voice was steady, calm, completely at odds with the earthquake happening inside her chest. "I can shoot very well." The medevac helicopter came in hot 20 minutes later, rotors beating the air into submission, dust billowing out in a brown cloud that covered everything and everyone. The crew chief jumped out before the skids fully touched ground, running toward the compound with a stretcher and a trauma bag. Hank was conscious but fading, his face pale under the dirt and blood. Kira helped load him, lifting the stretcher with hands that had stopped shaking, but had not stopped remembering. Every muscle in her body remembered, every nerve ending. 5 years of silence, and the memory was still there, etched into her bones like writing carved in stone. Hank grabbed her wrist with his good hand. His grip was surprisingly strong for a man who had lost the amount of blood that was soaking through the bandages on his shoulder. "Your file," he said. His voice was weak but clear, each word deliberate. "I looked it up after I heard you could shoot. Kira Tanner, ammunition specialist. No prior combat experience." She did not say anything, just held his wrist and tried to keep her face neutral. "But there is a gap," Hank continued, his eyes locked on hers with the intensity of a man who knew he was running out of time to say what needed to be said. 5 years between high school and enlistment. Nobody just disappears for 5 years. The medics were strapping him down, checking his vitals, preparing to lift. "I knew your father," Hank said. The world stopped. The helicopter noise faded. The dust froze mid-air. Everything went still except the hammering of Kira's heart. Ray Stratton. Hank said the name like a prayer, like a password to a room Kira had locked and bolted and buried the key to 5 years ago. Army Rangers. Best sniper instructor I ever met. She tried to pull away. Hank held on. "Beirut, 1983. I was 26 years old and stupid as hell. Your father saved my life 3 times in one deployment, once with his rifle, twice with his wisdom." The medics were lifting the stretcher. Hank's hand slipped from Kira's wrist. His fingers left faint red marks where they had gripped. "I will be back," he said. 2 weeks, maybe less. And when I get back, you are going to tell me why Ray Stratton's daughter is carrying ammunition instead of carrying a rifle." Then he was gone, loaded into the helicopter, lifted into the sky. The bird banked east toward Bagram, carrying the only person in Afghanistan who knew who Kira Stratton really was. She stood in the rotor wash and watched until the helicopter was a black dot against the white sky. Her shoulder still hurt, her hands had stopped shaking, and somewhere in her chest, something that had been locked away for 5 years was starting to crack open. A door she had sealed with grief and guilt and 5 years of deliberate amnesia. A door that led back to a driveway in Montana and a man slumped over a steering wheel, and the last words she would ever hear him speak. The flashback hit her that night. She was lying on her cot in the barracks, staring at the plywood ceiling, listening to the sounds of Marines settling in for the night. Someone was snoring. Someone else was listening to music through earbuds, the tinny sound leaking out like a secret. And Kira was in Montana. She was 22 years old, home from the national championships. 5-time defending champion, the first person in the history of the sport to win the long-range rifle title 5 consecutive years. Sponsorship offers piling up on the kitchen table. Olympic scouts calling every week. Magazine covers. Television interviews. The girl who could not miss. Her father was in the driveway working on his truck. He did that when he was upset. Took apart engines and put them back together. Let his hands work while his mind processed whatever was eating at him. The hood was up and he was bent over the engine block with a wrench in one hand and a rag in the other. Colonel Ray Stratton, retired, 51 years old. Hands scarred from years of fieldwork. Eyes that had seen things he never talked about, not to her, not to anyone. Army Ranger, sniper instructor. 20 years of teaching men and women how to shoot, how to survive, how to carry the weight of what the rifle demanded. Her father. Kira had walked out with a contract in her hand. $200,000 a year. Private sponsor, exhibitions, competitions, endorsements. More money than anyone in their family had ever imagined. "I am taking it," she had said, holding up the contract like a trophy. Ray looked up from the engine block, studied her face the way he studied everything. Slowly, carefully, missing nothing. "That what you want?" he asked. "Shoot for money." "It is $200,000, Dad. That is not money. That is life-changing. Could be life-ending too." He set down his wrench, wiped his hands on the rag. "That gift you have, Kira, it is not meant for exhibitions. It is not meant for trophies. Here we go." She had heard this speech before. The warrior's code, the higher purpose, the sacred responsibility that came with exceptional skill. She had been hearing it since she was old enough to hold a rifle and young enough to believe every word her father said. "I am serious, Kira. What I taught you, what we worked on all those years out on the range, that was not so you could get rich shooting paper targets." "Then what was it for?" she demanded. The frustration was real. The anger was real. 5 years of her life spent on ranges in every kind of weather. Weekends sacrificed friendships, missed a normal childhood, traded for something she was only now beginning to resent. What was the point of all those hours? All those weekends, if not this? Then what? Ray was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft. The kind of soft that meant he was saying something he considered more important than anything else he had ever said. It was for when someone needs protecting, and you are the only one who can do it. It was for when lives are on the line, and you are the difference between people going home to their families or going home in bags. That is what the gift is for. That is your life, Dad. Not mine. I do not want to be a soldier. I do not want to carry that weight. Then I failed to raise you right." The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a fired round. Kira felt her face flush, felt anger rising in her throat, hot and toxic and impossible to swallow. "You know what she said. Maybe you did fail. Maybe spending your whole life teaching people to kill things does not make you a good father. Maybe I do not want to be like you." She regretted the words the instant they left her mouth. Saw the way her father's face changed. Saw the hurt flash across his features, raw and deep, before he locked it down behind the stoic mask he had worn through 3 decades of military service. The mask that said nothing could touch him. The mask that lied. "I need to get out of here," he said quietly. "Dad, I did not mean. I know what you meant." He climbed into the truck, started the engine. The old Ford coughed to life the way it always did, reluctant and loud. He backed out of the driveway, made it halfway down the gravel road, and his heart stopped. Massive coronary. The doctor said later that he had probably had the condition for years, had ignored the symptoms the way he ignored everything that did not involve a rifle or a student or a range, had pushed through the pain the way he pushed through everything because Ray Stratton did not acknowledge weakness. Ray Stratton did not stop. He collapsed over the steering wheel. The truck rolled into the ditch. The engine kept running for another 40 minutes, burning fuel, while Ray Stratton's heart gave up the fight his body refused to quit. Kira found him 20 minutes after he drove away. 20 minutes. If she had gone after him immediately, if she had run out the door and chased the truck down the gravel road and said she was sorry and she did not mean it and she loved him and she was scared of becoming him because becoming him meant accepting a weight she did not know if she could carry. If she had done any of those things, maybe she could have called for help, maybe the ambulance would have arrived in time, maybe, but she had stayed in the house, angry, righteous, stupid, 22 years old and certain she was right about everything the way only 22-year-olds can be certain, and by the time she went looking, By the time she walked down the gravel road and found the truck in the ditch with the engine still running and her father slumped over the steering wheel with his eyes open and his hands still gripping at nothing. By that time, it was far too late. It had been too late before she even left the house. The last words he had spoken to her were, "I know what you meant." Oh, what use? The last words she had spoken to him were about what a failure he was. She did not touch a rifle after that. Could not go to the range. Could not look at her championship trophies without wanting to put her fist through the glass case. She packed them away, stored them in the basement, let the sponsorship offers expire unanswered. Let the Olympic scouts stop calling. Let the girl who could not miss disappear into a silence so complete that even her mother stopped asking when she was going to compete again. 5 years. She enlisted under her mother's maiden name, Tanner. Became Kira Tanner, ammunition specialist. No combat experience, no remarkable evaluations. Invisible. The way she wanted to be. The way she needed to be. Because every time she closed her eyes and saw a rifle, she saw her father's face. And every time she saw her father's face, she heard the last thing he ever said. "I know what you meant." Colonel Bridger's office was in the operations center at the forward operating base. Plywood walls, fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly dead. A map of Helmand province covered one wall, bristling with colored pins that marked positions and threats, and the slow grinding progress of a war that had been going on longer than some of the Marines fighting it had been alive. Bridger himself looked like he had been carved from the same quarry as Hank Coltrane, all hard angles and weathered surfaces. 62 years old, with silver hair cut high and tight, and eyes that had seen 3 wars and were not impressed by any of them. He sat behind a plywood desk and gestured for Kira to sit. She remained standing, at ease. "Corporal," Bridger said. "This is not a court-martial. Not yet." Kira shifted her weight but did not sit. Bridger opened a folder. The kind of manila folder that contained a person's military life in paper form. "Kira Tanner," he read, age 27. "My ammunition specialist. 6 months in theater, competent evaluations. Nothing remarkable." He looked up. His eyes were the color of old ice. "Until today. When you picked up a Barrett M82 and shot like you have been doing it your whole life. I was trained in basic marksmanship, sir. Same as everyone." Bridger's voice went flat. "I have been in the Corps for 40 years, Corporal. I know what basic marksmanship looks like. I know what advanced marksmanship looks like. What you did today was not basic anything. It was not advanced anything. It was something I have seen maybe 3 times in 4 decades of service." He pulled out another paper. "This is interesting. Your enlistment paperwork says you are Kira Tanner. But when I ran that name through the system, really ran it not just a standard check, I found something curious." He let the silence stretch. Kira felt sweat running down her spine. "Kira Tanner exists. She is your mother. Margaret Tanner, lives in Richmond, Virginia. School teacher. Never served." Kira's jaw tightened. The room suddenly felt very small. But Kira Stratton Bridger continued turning a page in the folder. "That name shows up in some very different places. National Rifle Championships. 5 consecutive titles. Ages 15 through 19. Called a prodigy. Called the best long-range shooter anyone had ever seen. Called a once-in-a-generation talent by people who do not use that phrase lightly." He closed the folder, placed both hands flat on the desk, looked at her with eyes that demanded truth. Why did Ray Stratton's daughter enlist under a false name? The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning unit struggling against the Afghan heat. Kira could feel her heart beating in her throat. She had known this moment would come eventually. Had known that the first time she picked up a rifle in front of witnesses, someone would ask questions she did not want to answer. She had just not expected it to happen today. "Permission to speak freely, sir." "Granted. I enlisted under my mother's name because I wanted to disappear." She said it simply. No drama, no trembling voice, just fact. "I did not want to be Ray Stratton's daughter. I did not want to be the girl who won 5 national championships. I wanted to be nobody." Why? The question was simple. The answer was anything but. Kira looked at the wall behind Bridger. At the map of Afghanistan with its constellation of pins marking coalition positions and enemy activity, and all the small violent transactions that made up a war. She looked at anything except the colonel's face. "Because my father died thinking I hated him." She said it quietly. "And I did not want to touch a rifle, ever again." Bridger was quiet. The kind of quiet that comes from a man who has heard enough confessions and enough grief to know when to let silence do the work that words cannot. Kira told him. Not everything but enough. The argument. The contract. The things she said. The truck in the ditch. The 20 minutes she spent being angry while her father's heart was stopping. She told it without tears because she had used up her tears years ago. She told it the way soldiers tell stories about the worst things that have happened to them. Flat, clinical, as if it had happened to someone else. Bridger listened. When she finished, he did not offer sympathy, did not say he was sorry. He did something worse. He told her the truth. 8 months before he died, your father came to see me. Kira's breath caught. He came here, to this base, flew halfway around the world to talk to me in person because he said some things could not be communicated over a phone line. Bridger walked to the window, looked out at the compound where Marines were filling sandbags and reinforcing positions. He said his daughter was the best natural shooter he had ever seen. Better than any student he had trained. Better than he was himself. He said it scared him how gifted you were, because he knew that kind of skill attracts the kind of situations where people die. He never told me that. Kira's voice was barely audible. He said you were going to do great things, but he also said he could not force you. Could not push you, could only prepare you, and hope that when the time came you would make the right choice on your own. Bridger turned from the window. Today you made a choice. You picked up a rifle and saved lives. That is what your father trained you for. That is what all those hours on the range were about. He is not here to know I finally understood, Kira said softly. Maybe he is. Maybe he is not. Bridger returned to his desk, opened a different folder. This one was thicker, stamped with classification markings that meant its contents were not for casual consumption. But I know this, you are not carrying ammunition anymore. As of right now, you are reassigned. Designated marksman. He slid the folder across the desk. We need to talk about the man who shot Master Sergeant Coltrane, the sniper you saw through your scope. Because he is not Taliban, he is not even Afghan. He opened the folder and pushed a photograph toward her. The man in the picture was younger than the one Kira had seen through her scope, but the features were unmistakable. Sharp cheekbones, pale eyes, the kind of face that looked like it had been designed for efficiency rather than warmth. Sergei Kovalenko, Bridger said, age 49, former Soviet Spetsnaz, one of the most dangerous snipers currently operating in theater. More photographs, crime scene photos, body bags, after-action reports with casualty figures that made Kira's stomach tighten. 34 confirmed coalition kills over the last 2 years. Probably twice that many we cannot confirm. He is not fighting for money. He is fighting for ideology. Believes he is liberating Afghanistan from American imperialism. Believes every American he kills is one less oppressor in the world. Bridger pulled out one more photograph. An old one. The kind that had yellowed with age, its edges soft and curling. It showed 2 men standing in front of a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. One was in an army uniform, young, maybe 30 years old. The other was in Soviet military dress, but his hands were not bound. They were shaking hands. 1986, Bridger said. Cold War prisoner exchange. Your father was assigned to guard duty at the Fort Bragg holding facility where we kept Soviet prisoners before transfer. That is him on the left. Kira looked closer. Recognized her father's face immediately. Younger, leaner, but the same eyes, the same quiet intensity, the same man who had stood behind her on a range in Montana and taught her to breathe. And that is Sergei Kovalenko on the right. Bridger continued. Your father taught him. For 6 weeks while Kovalenko waited for the exchange to go through, Ray taught him survival skills, sniper fundamentals. It was a humanitarian gesture. The kind of thing your father did because he believed that even enemies deserve dignity. Kira's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the desk to stop them. Turn the photo over, Bridger said. She did. On the back, in her father's handwriting, the handwriting she would recognize in 1,000 years because she had seen it on birthday cards and permission slips and notes left on the kitchen counter, were words that hit her like a round from the Barrett. Even enemies deserve dignity. Teach them to survive. Maybe someday they choose life over death. R. Stratton, February 1986. Kovalenko became an elite Soviet sniper after his release, Bridger said. Then the USSR collapsed and he defected to Chechnya, fought the Russians, then moved to Afghanistan. Now he trains Taliban fighters in advanced marksmanship, creates killers. Your father showed him mercy 30 years ago, and Kovalenko turned that mercy into a weapon. My father taught him, Kira said. Her voice sounded hollow, like it was coming from the bottom of a well. Your father tried to teach him something else. Tried to show him that skill could be used for protection instead of destruction. Apparently Kovalenko did not learn that lesson. Bridger closed the folder. Today, when you were on that roof, when you were behind the scope, did Kovalenko take a shot at you? Kira thought back. The glint of scope glass. The face watching her. The 3 seconds of mutual recognition across 600 meters of Afghan air. He had a shot, she said. 600 meters. Clean line of sight. He could have killed me, but he did not. No. He pulled back. Bridger nodded slowly. The kind of slow nod that meant he had expected this answer and was not happy about what it implied. He recognized your technique, your father's technique. That is the only explanation. Sergei Kovalenko has killed 34 coalition soldiers without hesitation, but he would not kill Ray Stratton's daughter. What does that mean? It means he has a code. Twisted maybe, but a code nonetheless. It also means he is going to come for you eventually. Because you are not just another American soldier to him. You are the daughter of the man who showed him mercy 30 years ago. You are personal. Bridger stood. Walked to the window one more time. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the peaks in shades of red and gold that would have been beautiful if they were not also painting the landscape of a war zone. You are not hiding anymore, Corporal. No more false names. No more pretending to be someone you are not. From this moment forward, you are Kira Stratton, designated marksman, and your first assignment is the man your father tried to save. Kira stood, saluted, turned to leave. Corporal Bridger said. She stopped. Your father would be proud. What you did today, picking up that rifle when it mattered saving those Marines. That is exactly what he trained you for. That is exactly what he hoped you would do when the time came. Kira nodded. She did not trust herself to speak. Then she walked out into the Afghan dusk, feeling the weight of her real name settling back onto her shoulders, after 5 years of running from it. Kira Stratton, daughter of Ray Stratton, sniper. The stars were coming out over Afghanistan. The same stars her father had taught her to navigate by when she was 12 years old. The same stars that had watched over him in Beirut and Grenada and every deployment he had ever taken. The same stars that had watched him die in a ditch in Montana while his daughter sat in a house 20 minutes away, too angry and too young and too certain of her own righteousness to run after him and say the only 3 words that mattered. She looked up at those stars now, and for the first time in 5 years she did not look away. Hank Coltrane walked back into the forward operating base 14 days after a .50 caliber round punched through his shoulder and put him on a medevac helicopter. The doctors at Bagram had given him 4 weeks minimum, had told him the muscle needed time, the bone needed time, the body needed time to remember how to be whole again. Hank had given the doctors 2 weeks and then signed himself out against medical advice because Hank Coltrane did not operate on other people's timelines. His left arm was still in a sling, his face was still the color of old concrete, but his right hand was steady when he shook Kira's hand outside the barracks, and his eyes were clear and sharp and completely unsurprised to find her standing there in the morning sun with a Barrett M82 slung across her back instead of a crate of ammunition. Heard you got promoted, he said. Reassigned, Kira corrected. Same thing when the reassignment comes with a rifle. He looked at the Barrett, then looked at her. How does it feel like coming home to a house you burned down? Hank almost smiled. The expression did not quite make it to his mouth, but it registered in his eyes. The kind of almost smile that belonged to a man who understood exactly what she meant because he had lived in a similar house his entire adult life. They started training that morning, before the sun cleared the mountains, before the base was fully awake, before anyone could ask questions about why a 54-year-old man with a hole in his shoulder was spotting for a 27-year-old woman who had been carrying ammunition 2 weeks ago. The range was a stretch of open ground east of the base marked with steel silhouettes at distances that increased in increments, designed to test everything a shooter knew and reveal everything a shooter did not. 800 meters, 1,000, 1,200, 1,500, 1,800. Each distance a new conversation between the rifle and the laws of physics, with wind and gravity and temperature serving as translators that did not always cooperate. Kira settled behind the Barrett at 800 meters. The target was a steel plate cut into the shape of a human torso. Not a person. Not yet. But close enough that her subconscious made the connection every time. Your father used to say that every shot is a conversation, Hank said. He was lying beside her with a spotting scope pressed to his good eye, his injured arm tucked against his body. The rifle asks a question. The target gives an answer. Everything in between, the wind, the distance, the light, that is just translation. "What question am I asking?" Kira said. "That is for you to figure out." She fired. The Barrett roared. 800 meters away, the steel target rang like a church bell in an empty town. "Center mass!" Again, Hank said. She fired again. Hit again. Again. "This time think about Beirut." "I was not alive in Beirut. Your father was. 1983. I was there with him. Marine barracks bombing. 241 killed in a single blast. Your father and I were part of the security detachment that survived." Hank lowered the spotting scope. Looked at her directly with eyes that had seen things no amount of time could smooth over. "He made a shot that day that I still do not understand. 1,400 meters, iron sights, moving target, saved 16 Marines who were pinned down by a sniper in the ruins. But the impossible part was not the distance, and it was not the iron sights. It was that your father waited. The sniper presented himself 3 times before that final shot. 3 opportunities. And your father passed on all of them because the conditions were not perfect. Because he knew that if he missed, the sniper would disappear and those 16 Marines would die. He waited for the only shot he knew he could not miss, and when it came, he did not hesitate. Kira chambered another round, focused on the target at 1,000 meters. "He never told me about Beirut," she said. "He would not have. Ray did not talk about his kills. Said every one of them was a failure. Proof that talking had not worked, that deterrence had not worked, that the only solution left was a bullet, and a bullet was always the last solution, never the first. But he also said that every shot he took kept someone's father alive, someone's son, someone's brother. That is how he carried it, by knowing he was the shield between the wolves and the sheep." Kira fired. 1,000 meters. Another hit. The steel rang across the valley. "The hardest part of being a sniper is not the shooting," Hank said. "Your father told me that in Beirut. It is knowing when not to shoot, knowing when the shot will make things worse instead of better. He lived that. Every deployment. He turned down more shots than he took. Made him slower to fire than most snipers, but it also made him never miss when he did pull the trigger." One evening they sat in the armory cleaning weapons. Hank was running a boar snake through an M4 with the methodical patience of a man who had cleaned 10,000 rifles and intended to clean 10,000 more. "Your father believed snipers were not killers," he said. "He said we were shepherds. We stand between the wolves and the flock. We keep watch. And when a wolf comes, we put it down before it can harm the sheep." "Kovalenko probably thinks he's a shepherd too," Kira said. "He does. I have read his writings. He believes he is fighting imperialism, believes every American he kills brings the world closer to justice. So we are both shepherds. We just disagree about who the wolves are. That is war. Everyone thinks they are the hero of their own story." Hank set down the rifle he was cleaning. Looked at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Something unguarded. Something that cost him. "My son was a Marine sniper," he said. The words settled in the room like dust after an explosion. "Danny." He said the name carefully. Lost him in Iraq. 2004. He was 22 years old. Died protecting his squad. Stayed behind to provide cover while they extracted a wounded teammate. Took out 6 insurgents before they finally got him. They gave him the Silver Star posthumously. Sent it to me in a box with a folded flag and a letter that said things no letter can actually say. Hank reached into his pocket, pulled out a photograph. A young man in dress blues fresh from boot camp. Square jaw, serious eyes. The same face as Hank's 30 years younger. Grinning at the camera with the confidence of someone who has not yet learned what the world is capable of taking. Your father wrote me after Danny died. Long letter. Said he knew what it felt like to train someone you love for something that might kill them. Said he watched you on the range when you were 16 and realized you were going to be better than him. Said it terrified him because he knew that kind of skill attracts the kind of situations where people die. Kira took the photograph. Looked at the young man's face. He also said he would not change anything, would not take back a single lesson he taught you, because he believed that one person with the right training and the right heart could save 100 lives. And he believed you had both. I let him down, Kira said. Told him I was going to shoot for money instead of purpose. Told him he failed as a father. Those were the last words I ever said to him. And then you enlisted, served your country. And when the moment came, you picked up the rifle and saved 8 Marines. Hank took the photograph back, tucked it into his pocket. Sounds to me like you proved him right. 2 weeks later, Colonel Bridger summoned them both to the operations center. The room was crowded. Officers from JSOC occupied one side of the table. Intelligence analysts lined the other. Langston Weiss sat at the far end, legs-crossed posture, suggesting someone accustomed to rooms where important decisions were made by people who would never face the consequences. From Langley. He did not elaborate. The map on the wall showed Kunar province, the mountains along the Pakistani border, terrain so rough that the Soviets had never fully pacified it, and neither had the Americans. We have confirmed the location of Kovalenko's training camp, Weiss said. Satellite imagery shows 43 heat signatures, fortified position, multiple buildings, advanced rifle range with targets set up out to 2,000 meters. The camp has been active for 6 weeks, which means Kovalenko's current class is about to graduate. Once they do, they will deploy throughout the region. 40 new snipers who shoot the way Ray Stratton taught them to shoot. Colonel Bridger stepped forward. JSOC is authorizing a direct action mission. Capture or kill Kovalenko. Destroy the training facility. Timeline is 4 days. Kovalenko runs a final examination on day 42 of each training cycle. That is when he will be most visible, most vulnerable. He looked at Kira. You will be primary sniper. Master Sergeant Coltrane will spot. You will insert with a force recon team. Lieutenant Prescott's squad. Weiss cleared his throat. There is one more thing you should know. We intercepted a communication 2 days ago. Kovalenko sent a message to his Taliban handlers. It was encrypted, but we broke it. He pressed a button. A voice filled the room. Russian-accented English over a radio transmission heavy with static and distance. Tell the Americans that I know Ray Stratton's daughter is hunting me. Tell them I look forward to teaching her the lessons her father forgot to teach. Tell them that when we meet she will learn that mercy is weakness, and her father's code died with him in America. The room went silent. Kira felt every eye turn towards her. He knows, she said. He knows, Weiss confirmed. But there is something else. Something that changes the tactical picture entirely. He clicked the remote again. A new image appeared on the screen. A timeline of NSA intercepts dates and frequencies plotted on a graph that showed a clear pattern. Kovalenko did not just fail to conceal this communication. He used a cipher we broke 6 months ago. A cipher he knows we broke because we exploited it in an operation he witnessed in Kandahar. He is one of the most sophisticated signals operators we have ever tracked. He does not make mistakes like this. He wanted us to intercept it, Kira said. He wanted us to know where he is. Weiss nodded. This is not a security failure. This is an invitation. He wants you to come to him. 4 days later, she was in the back of a helicopter flying low over the mountains. Lieutenant Prescott sat across from her checking his rifle. Corporal Harlan was beside him. 3 more Marines from the Force Recon team filled the remaining seats. Hank was next to her. His shoulder healed enough that he could carry a pack and use a spotting scope, though she could see him wince when the helicopter banked hard. The crew chief held up 5 fingers. 5 minutes to insertion. Somewhere below, Sergei Kovalenko was waiting. A man her father had taught. A man her father had shown mercy. A man who had taken that mercy and twisted it into something that had killed 34 Americans and was about to produce 40 more killers. The helicopter flared. The crew chief pointed at the door. Go! Kira jumped into the darkness, felt her boots hit solid ground, moved away from the landing zone. Behind her, the rest of the team was spreading out, establishing security. The helicopter lifted, banked, disappeared into the night. Then there was only silence, and stars, and the weight of the rifle on her back. They moved through the mountains for 4 hours, spacing themselves 20 meters apart, using night vision to navigate terrain that would have been treacherous in daylight. Step, pause, listen. Step again. 3 hours in. Hank raised his fist. Everyone froze, voices ahead. Pashto, Taliban patrol. 3 men, relaxed, not expecting contact. One was smoking, another was laughing. They passed without seeing the Marines, without knowing how close they had come to dying. The observation point was a rocky outcropping on a ridge overlooking the valley. Perfect position, high ground, good sight lines. Kira and Hank set up while the rest of the team established a security perimeter. She assembled the Barrett in the grey pre-dawn light. At noon, movement at the range building. A tall figure emerged, walking with the stride of someone who owned the ground. Through the scope, Kira saw him clearly. Sergei Kovalenko, teaching, demonstrating stance and breathing. His students gathered around him, attentive, absorbing lessons the same way she had absorbed her father's lessons on a range in Montana. The same patience, the same precision. For a moment, if she blurred her vision slightly, she could almost see her father standing there instead. Range 1,400 meters, Hank said. Wind from the northwest, 8 knots. Do you have the shot? I have the shot. Hold. Wait for clearance. Prescott's voice in her earpiece. She held, watched Kovalenko teach, watched him move from student to student. Then Kovalenko stopped, turned, and looked directly toward the ridge where Kira lay behind her rifle. He knows, Hank said. How the hell does he know Kovalenko was already moving, shouting to his students? The camp erupted, fighters grabbing weapons, taking cover. We are blown, Prescott said. All elements prepare to engage. Kovalenko ran toward the range building. Kira tracked him, led him, started to squeeze. He dove through the doorway at the exact moment her round impacted where his body had been. Miss! Target is inside the structure! Gunfire erupted from the valley, a K-47 rounds cracking overhead. The Force Recon team returned fire. We need to move, Prescott said. This position is compromised. They ran, down the reverse slope, rocks sliding beneath their boots, Hank beside her despite his shoulder. Behind them, Harlan and 2 Marines laying down suppressive fire. Rally Point Bravo, Prescott called. 1,200 meters south-southwest. Standard leapfrog. They covered 300 meters before taking cover. Kira set up the Barrett while Hank scanned their back trail. 20 hostiles pursuing, spreading out, trying to flank us. They ran again, took cover, ran again. The Taliban following but not closing, too controlled, too patient. The pattern bothered Kira. Fighters who had just been attacked should be angry, aggressive, making mistakes. These fighters were disciplined, following a plan. Then Harlan went down, shot in the leg. His teammate grabbed him, started dragging him toward cover while rounds kicked up dust around their boots. Kira found targets on the high ground. Fired 4 times in 10 seconds. 4 fighters fell. The ambush broke. But the realization hit her. Hank! She grabbed his arm. We are being pushed. He looked at the terrain, his jaw tightened. South. He is pushing us south. Toward what? Toward his students. The main camp. 3 clicks south. If he drives us into that valley, we are caught between his pursuit force and 40 more fighters. Kira looked at the map in her head. The ridges, the valleys, the narrowing options funneling them toward exactly where Kovalenko wanted them. The training range, she said, Kovalenko's facility, 2 clicks east, elevated, fortified. We take it, hold the high ground, and call in air support. That is going deeper into hostile territory, Prescott said. It is also the last place they will expect us to go, and Kovalenko will have to come to us instead of pushing us where he wants. Silence on the radio. Do it. All elements rally on the training range. They reached the facility with the sun overhead. 3 buildings. Target stands stretching into the valley. The main structure built into the hillside. They set up defensive positions. Harlan in the most protected corner. Marines at windows and firing ports. Kira and Hank on the roof. From here she could see the entire valley. Taliban fighters moving through the rocks. 40 of them. Maybe more. Air support, she asked. Prescott shook his head. 20 minutes minimum. Weather is turning bad. Helicopters cannot fly through it. Then we hold for 20 minutes. Then the voice came. It rolled across the valley like weather, amplified by a loudspeaker. Russian accented English that settled over the compound like a cold wind. Daughter of Ray Stratton, I know you hear me. Kira moved to the edge of the roof, found Kovalenko standing on an outcropping 400 meters away, completely exposed, a megaphone in his hand. I watched you through my scope. I saw your technique. Your father taught you well. He taught me also. In 1986. For 6 weeks at Fort Bragg. He showed me dignity when Soviet officers would have had me shot. Showed me mercy when American soldiers wanted revenge. Hank was ranging the target. You have the shot. 400 meters. No wind. He is standing still. But Kira hesitated. Kovalenko was too exposed. Too confident. A man who had survived 30 years of war did not stand in the open within rifle range unless the exposure itself was the weapon. He taught me that every bullet is a choice, Kovalenko continued. That killing should never be easy. That the moment it becomes routine is the moment you lose your humanity. Your father was wrong about many things, but he was right about that. He is stalling, Prescott said from below, keeping us fixed while his men maneuver. Kovalenko raised the megaphone again. I propose something your father would appreciate, a duel, you and I. Sniper tradition, tomorrow at dawn, 1,500 meters. You win and I surrender. My students scatter. I give you everything, names, locations, networks. I win and your team goes free. No pursuit, no reprisals. Do not trust it, Prescott said immediately. But Kira was thinking. About her father, about the photograph, about the inscription on the back. Even enemies deserve dignity. If I do not accept, she said, we fight our way out. 8 Marines against 40 fighters in terrain. They know better than we do. Either way, people die on both sides. Hank was quiet, looking at her with old eyes. The eyes of a man who had lost a son to war. What would my father do? Kira asked him. Your father would accept. Hank said it without hesitation. He would hate it. He would know the risk. But he would accept because it is a chance to end this without massacring 40 students who are just kids being taught the wrong lessons by the wrong teacher. Kira walked to the edge of the roof, cupped her hands around her mouth. I accept. Dawn. 1,500 meters. But I have a condition. Name it, Kovalenko called back. If I win, you tell me what my father's last words to you were. In 1986, the night before he released you. Silence across the valley. Long enough that the wind shifted and the shadows moved and the mountains held their breath. Then his voice came back. Changed. Softer. Stripped of performance. Agreed. His last words are why I am still alive. You should know them. Dawn then. Sleep well, daughter of Ray. Tomorrow we discover which of his students learned his lessons better. Kovalenko disappeared behind the rocks. The Taliban fighters pulled back. A temporary ceasefire, held together by nothing more than a promise, shouted across mountain air. Prescott climbed to the roof. This is insane. He could attack at night. And what if he is actually better than you? Kira looked at the Barrett. Then I die, she said simply. And you call in air support and destroy this place and everyone in it. Either way, the training camp is finished. That night nobody slept well. The Marines took turns on watch weapons always within reach. The ceasefire was a handshake between strangers across a canyon. Kira did not even attempt to sleep when her turn came. She sat with her back against the wall, cleaning the Barrett for the third time. The rifle did not need cleaning, but her hands needed something to do. Hank found her there. He lowered himself to the ground beside her with the careful deliberation of a man negotiating with his own body. The cold mountain air made his shoulder ache. She could see it in the way he carried himself. "You should rest," he said. "Cannot." He was quiet for a moment. Above them the stars blazed in the Afghan sky with the cold intensity of lights that have been burning for billions of years and will continue burning long after the people beneath them have settled their small, violent disagreements. "Tell me about the shot in Beirut," Kira said. "You said my father waited for the perfect moment. How did he know when it came? He did not know. Not with certainty. Nobody ever does. But he knew the difference between a shot he might make and a shot he could not miss. And he had the discipline to wait 4 hours for the only one that mattered, even when waiting meant watching those Marines take fire the entire time. What if that moment does not come tomorrow? Then you make the best shot you can with the moment you have. That is all any of us can do." Hank reached into his pocket, pulled out the photograph of Danny. "Keep this," he said. "For luck." "I cannot take this. You can. Danny would want you to have it. He believed in the same things your father believed in. Protection over glory, service over self. He would want you to carry that into tomorrow." Kira took the photograph, held it carefully. "I will bring it back," she said. "I know you will." Kira thought about Kovalenko through the long hours of that night. Not as a target, not as a mission objective, but as a man. She had read his file so many times she could recite it from memory. Born in Leningrad, recruited into Spetsnaz at 19, captured during a covert operation in Pakistan in 1985, transferred to Fort Bragg for the prisoner exchange in 86, 6 weeks with her father. She tried to imagine it. Ray Stratton walking into a holding cell with food and patience and the quiet belief that even enemies deserve to be treated as human beings. Teaching a captured Soviet soldier survival techniques and rifle fundamentals, not because he was ordered to, but because Ray Stratton believed that kindness was not weakness. And then Chechnya. The file had been sparse on details, but the trajectory was clear. Kovalenko returned to the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union collapsed. Everything he had believed in dissolved overnight. And then the wars came. Chechnya, the brutality. His unit ambushed in 1996, 11 men killed. Kovalenko the sole survivor. She understood how a man could take the mercy he had been shown and forge it into something else entirely. How kindness received could become rage expressed. How the lessons of a gentle teacher could be bent and twisted until they served purposes the teacher never intended. Ray Stratton had taught Sergei Kovalenko that skill could protect. Kovalenko had learned instead that skill could avenge. Dawn came the way it comes in the mountains, not gradually. The darkness did not fade so much as retreat, pulling back from the peaks like a curtain drawn by an impatient hand. Kira stood on the roof of the training building. The Barrett was assembled and ready. The scope was zeroed. 5 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber. 1,500 meters across the valley she could see movement on the rocky outcrop. Kovalenko setting up. Methodical. Professional. The same careful preparation her father had taught both of them. Hank was beside her, spotting scope up. Wind is 3 knots from the east. Temperature 42 degrees. Barometric pressure is steady. Conditions are as good as they are going to get. Kira settled behind the Barrett. The scope came up to her eye. Kovalenko was there. She could see him clearly. He raised his hand. "Ready." Kira raised her own hand. "Ready." For 3 seconds nothing happened. 2 snipers facing each other across 1,500 meters of empty mountain air. Both trained by the same man. Both carrying the weight of his lessons. Kovalenko fired first. Kira saw the muzzle flash, a tiny spark of light on the distant rocks. She dropped flat as the round impacted the wall behind where her head had been. Stone fragments showered down on her back. "He is fast," Hank said. "Faster than I expected." Kira was already repositioning, moving 3 meters to the left, setting up again. Through the scope she found Kovalenko moving too. She waited, found the rhythm. He appeared in her scope. She fired. 1,500 meters away, rock exploded next to Kovalenko's head. Close, but a miss. 3 inches right, Hank said. Wind shifted. Just 2 mils left. They fell into a rhythm that was also a conversation. Kovalenko would fire, Kira would return fire, both moving between shots, both adjusting. The duel stretched from seconds into minutes, neither able to land the killing shot. Both too skilled to present a fatal target for more than the fraction of a second it took to fire and move. Kira fired her 5th round and watched it impact exactly where Kovalenko had been a half-second earlier. He was reading her timing, anticipating her shots, understanding the rhythm her father had taught her because her father had taught him the same rhythm 30 years ago. "He is in your head," Hank said. "He knows the pattern. You need to break it." Then Kovalenko's voice echoed across the valley. Not amplified, just his natural voice carrying in the thin mountain air. "You shoot like Ray. Same patience, same precision, but you are missing what he tried to teach me." "He is trying to get in your head," Hank said. "Do not listen." But Kira was listening, because Kovalenko was right. Every shot she had taken had been about technique, about calculations, about the mechanics of putting a bullet on a target. She had been treating this the way she had treated every championship she had ever won, as a problem of physics and physiology, as an equation with a correct answer. This was not a championship. This was not physics. This was a question her father had been asking her since she was 11 years old, and she had never understood it until this moment. The question was not whether she could make the shot. The question was whether she should. "Hank," she said quietly, "what did my father say about knowing when not to shoot?" Hank looked at her. His eyes were wet. "He said the hardest shot is the one you do not take." Kira set the Barrett down, placed her hands flat on the roof, felt the cold stone beneath her palms, felt her heart beating, felt the weight of every choice she had ever made pressing down on her chest, like the recoil of a rifle she had finally decided not to fire. Then she stood up, fully upright, completely exposed, every inch of her body visible against the sky at 1,500 meters. A perfect target, the easiest shot Sergei Kovalenko would ever be offered. Hank grabbed for her arm. "Get down! What are you doing? Get down!" She did not get down. She stood on that rooftop in the morning light and looked across the valley to where Kovalenko lay behind his rifle with his crosshairs almost certainly centered on her chest. She could feel the invisible line between his muzzle and her heart. One twitch of his finger and she would be dead before the sound reached her ears. She cupped her hands around her mouth. "My father's last words," she shouted across the valley. "You promised." Silence. The valley held its breath. The wind stopped. The mountain stood witness. Then 1,500 meters away, Sergei Kovalenko stood up too. He rose slowly, deliberately, his rifle lowered, his body exposed in the same way Kira's body was exposed. Two people standing on opposite sides of a valley with nothing between them except air and the memory of a man who had taught them both that the most powerful thing a person with a weapon can do is choose not to use it. February 1986. Kovalenko called across the distance. His voice was different now, stripped of performance, stripped of ideology, stripped of everything except the raw sound of a man remembering something that had shaped him more deeply than he had ever been willing to admit. Night before my release. Your father came to my cell. Kira listened. Every cell in her body listened. He brought food. Good food, not the military rations. He sat on the floor of my cell and we ate together. He did not talk about war. He asked about my family, my mother in Leningrad, my sister. He told me about you. Said he had a daughter who could outshoot him by the time she was 15. Said it was the proudest and most terrifying thing he had ever experienced. Kovalenko's voice caught. a crack in the armor that 30 years of killing had built around whatever was left of the man Ray Stratton had shared a meal with. Then he stood up to leave, and he said words I have carried for 30 years. He said, "Sergei, I teach you this skill not to make you a killer. I teach you so that one day you choose not to kill when you have the power to kill. That choice, mercy, when you are strongest, is what separates a human being from an animal, what separates a warrior from a murderer." Kovalenko paused. The valley was completely still. He said, "If you remember nothing else I have taught you, remember this. The hardest shot is the one you do not take." Kovalenko lowered his rifle completely, let it hang from its sling. His hands were empty. 1,500 meters away, Kira could see him through the morning light, and she understood for the first time what her father had seen in that cell 30 years ago. Not an enemy, not a target, a human being capable of choosing something other than what the world had made him. "You remembered," Kira called across the valley. Her voice was steady, her cheeks were wet. "I remembered," Kovalenko called back, "but I did not understand. Not for 30 years, not until today. Watching you stand up instead of shoot. Now I understand what Ray tried to teach me." Hank was standing beside her, his hand on her shoulder. The same place her father's hand had rested when she was 16 and about to make the shot that would win her first national championship. The same gesture, the same weight. "What happens now?" Hank asked quietly. "Now I surrender," Kovalenko called. "I give you names, locations, everything. I accept whatever your justice demands. Because your father was right. The hardest shot is the one you do not take, and today you did not take it. You passed the test I failed for 30 years. An hour later, Kira sat in the training building while Kovalenko, his hands secured with zip ties, provided grid coordinates and names to Lieutenant Prescott, who relayed everything to JSOC through the satellite phone. Network locations, supply routes, safe houses in 3 provinces, the names of every student he had trained and every Taliban commander who had funded the program. Intelligence that would dismantle the sniper network across half of Afghanistan. Hank sat beside Kira. "Your father would be proud," he said quietly. "How do you know?" "Because you chose protection over revenge, mercy over victory. That is exactly what he wanted you to learn." Kovalenko looked up from the debriefing, caught Kira's eye across the room, nodded once. The kind of acknowledgement that passes between 2 students of the same teacher who have traveled different roads to arrive at the same understanding. The helicopters arrived 30 minutes later. Kovalenko was loaded onto the first one. He went without resistance. His face was calm, the calm of a man who has stopped fighting something. The Marines loaded onto the second helicopter. Harlan's leg wound stabilized. Everyone exhausted. Everyone alive. As the helicopter lifted off, Kira looked down at the training range, at the place where she had stood up instead of lying down, where she had asked for words instead of offering lead, where she had learned the lesson that Ray Stratton had spent his entire life trying to teach her. 8 months later, on a cold November afternoon, Kira stood at Arlington National Cemetery. The leaves had turned gold and red, painting the rows of white headstones in autumn colors that should have been beautiful, but felt instead like the earth putting on dress uniforms to honor its dead. She had been promoted to sergeant, assigned as instructor at the Scout Sniper School at Camp Pendleton, teaching alongside Hank, who had finally accepted medical retirement after his shoulder refused to fully heal, but who had talked his way into a civilian instructor position because Hank Coltrane did not know how to stop teaching any more than he knew how to stop breathing. Kovalenko's intelligence had dismantled the Taliban sniper network. 14 successful operations across 3 provinces. His students had been captured or scattered. The training camps were destroyed. Kovalenko himself sat in a supermax prison in Colorado, serving life without parole. He had cooperated fully, had testified against Taliban commanders, had provided information that saved American lives. The prosecution had wanted death. Kira's testimony about her father's mercy and the choice Kovalenko had made on that mountaintop had helped spare him from execution. She knelt beside her father's grave. Colonel Ray Stratton, United States Army Rangers, 1955 to 2006.
Beloved father, beloved teacher.
She pulled the Navy Cross from her pocket. The citation mentioned her marksmanship, her courage under fire, her intelligence gathering that led to the dismantling of a terrorist sniper network. It did not mention the shot she did not take. That was between her and her father. She placed the medal on the grave next to flowers someone else had left. I finally understand, she said quietly, what you were trying to teach me, what you saw in me that I could not see in myself. All those years on the range, all those arguments about purpose and responsibility. I thought you were trying to control me. You were trying to prepare me. The cemetery was quiet except for the wind in the trees and the distant sound of a bugle playing taps. I'm teaching now, just like you did, passing on what you gave me. Not just the shooting, the important stuff. The knowledge that skill without wisdom is just murder with better accuracy. She traced her fingers over the letters of his name. Hank sends his regards. He talks about you constantly. Tells stories about Beirut and Grenada. Makes sure every student knows your name. She pulled out a piece of paper. Read from it. The hardest shot is the one you do not take. The mason is coming next week to engrave it. I wanted you to know first, wanted you to know that your daughter finally learned what you were trying to teach her. She saluted. The formal gesture she had never given him while he was alive because she had been too proud and too young to understand what he had been trying to give her. She held it for a long moment. The wind moved the leaves. The trees whispered. Then she turned and walked back toward the car where Hank was waiting. He had insisted on coming, said that visiting Ray's grave was something students did together. You okay? He asked. Yeah, she said. I think I finally am. The next morning, Kira stood in front of 40 students at Camp Pendleton. They were young, eager, confident in the way people are before they understand what they are actually being trained for. She held up the Barrett M82. This rifle can kill a human being at 2,000 meters. Most of your training will focus on how to use it, how to calculate range and wind, how to read terrain, how to make shots that seem impossible. She set the rifle down. But the most important lesson I will teach you is not about shooting. It is about not shooting. About knowing the difference between a shot you can make and a shot you should make. About understanding that every time you pull this trigger, you are making a choice you will carry for the rest of your life. One student raised his hand. Young, 20 maybe. Sergeant, with respect, it's not our job to eliminate threats. Good question, Kira said. Let me tell you a story. After class, Hank walked over. His limp was more pronounced than usual. Cold weather, old wounds. Good class, he said. Hard class. They want me to teach them to be killers. I'm trying to teach them to be something else. He pulled out his phone, showed her a message. Tell Kira thank you. I teach now too. Inmates. Reading. Thinking. Choosing better paths. Finally understanding what Ray tried to show me. The hardest shot is the one you do not take. S.K. Kira read it twice, felt something settle in her chest that people could change, that her father's lessons could reach even those who had spent decades running from them. You going to respond? Hank asked. Maybe. Maybe I will tell him his teacher would be proud. They walked toward the instructor housing. The sun was setting over Pendleton, painting the sky in the same gold and orange as the Afghan mountains where she had chosen to stand instead of shoot. Tomorrow she would wake before dawn, would teach another class, would pass on her father's gift. Not the ability to kill from 1,000 meters, the wisdom to know when that ability should stay holstered. The hardest shot is the one you do not take. That was the lesson. That was the legacy. That was what it meant to be Ray Stratton's daughter, and she would spend the rest of her life making sure that lesson never died.